For the fourth time, Mrs. Samantha Richards, stared at the boy sitting on the first chair in the second row by the window with complete disregard for the class. He was busy staring out of the window. From time to time, he would look at Mrs. Richards and then turn back to the view of the window. This was her first day as biology teacher at one of the international schools in Islamabad. She was a diplomat's wife and a teacher by profession. They had recently arrived in Islamabad at all her husband's postings. She had taken up teaching assignments in the schools attached to the assembly embassy, continuing the syllabus and teaching schedule of her predecessor, Mrs. Mariam. After a brief introduction to the class, Mrs. Richard began explaining the function of the heart and the circulation system and drew a diagram on the board. She looked at the student who was looking distractedly out of the window and, using a time-worn technique, she fixed her gaze on him and stopped speaking. A hush fell over the class. The boy turned back to the class, meeting his gaze. Mrs. Richards smiled and resumed her lecture. For a while, she continued to keep her gaze on the boy who was now busy writing in his notebook. Then she turned her attention to the class. She believed the boy was embarrassed enough not to let his attention wander. But just a couple of minutes later, she found him looking out at the window again once more. She stopped her lecture and turned to look at her. This time she did not smile. She continued addressing the class. As she turned to the writing board, the student again turned to the window. A look of annoyance crossed her face, and as she fell silent again, the boy looked at her with a frown and looked away beyond the window. His attitude was so insulting that Mrs. Samantha Richards' face flushed. Sadar, what are you looking at? She asked sternly. Nothing, came the one word reply. He gave her a piercing look. Do you know what I am teaching? Hope so. His tone was so rude that Samantha Richards capped a marker she had in her hand and slapped it down on the table. If that is so, then come up here and draw a label this diagram. She erased the figure on the board. The boy's face changed myriad colors. She saw the students in the class exchange glances. The boy stared coldly at Samantha Richards as she cleaned the last trace of a diagram from the board. He left his seat. Moving swiftly, he picked up the marker from the table and with lightning speed in exactly 2 minutes and 57 seconds, he had drawn the labeled diagram. Replacing the cap on the marker, he slapped it down on the table just as Mrs. Richards had done, and without looking at her, returned to his seat. Mrs. Richards did not see him tossing down the marker or walking back to his seat. She was looking in disbelief at the diagram, which had taken her 10 minutes to make and which he had completed in less than 3 minutes. It was far better than her work. She could not even find a minor her work. Flaw in it. Somewhat embarrassed, she turned to look at the boy once again. He was looking out of the window. Wasim knocked on the door for the third time. This time he could hear Imama inside. Who is it? Imama, it's me. Open the door, said Wasim, standing back. There was silence on the other side. A little later, the lock clicked and Wasim turned the door knob to enter. Imama moved towards her bed with her back to Wasim. What brings you here at this time? Why did you turn in so early? It's only 10 now, Wasim replied as he walked in. I was sleepy. She sat down on the bed. Wasim was alarmed to see her. Have you been crying? It was a subconscious remark. Imama's eyes were red and sullen, and she was trying to look away. No, no, I wasn't crying. Just a bad headache. She tried to smile. Wasim, sitting down beside her, held her hand, trying to check her temperature. Any fever? He asked with some concern. Then he let go her hand. You don't have fever. Perhaps you should take a tablet for your headache. I have. Good. Go to sleep. Then I had come to talk to you, but you are in no state. Wasim turned to leave the room. Imama made no effort to stop him. She followed him to the door and shut it behind him. Flinging herself on the bed, she buried her face in the pillow. She was sobbing again. The 13-year-old boy was engrossed in the music show on TV. Tayyiba peeped in. She looked at her son somewhat uncertainly. and entered the room irritated. What's going on? I'm watching TV, he replied without looking at her. Watching TV? For God's sake, are you aware that your exams have started? Tayyiba asked, standing in front of him. So what? He said, annoyed. So what? You should be in your room with your books, not sitting here watching this vulgar show. Taiba scolded him. I have studied as much as I need to. Now please move out of my way. His tone reflected his irritation. At the same go and study all the same, go and study. Taiba stood her ground. No, I will not get up, nor will I go and study. My studies are my papers and are my concerns, not yours. If you were concerned about your studies, would be you be sitting here? Step aside, he ignored. Tayyiba commented and rudely showed her way. I am going to talk to your father today. Tayyiba tried a threat. You can talk to him for all I care. What will happen? What is he going to do? I have told you that I have already prepared for my exams. Then what is your problem? This is your final exams. You should be concerned about it. Taiba softened her tone. I am not a 4-year old who you need to nag. I have a better understanding of my responsibilities than you, so don't pester me with your silly advice. Your exams are on. Pay attention to your studies. You should be in your room. I will have a word with your father. What rubbish! Standing up, he flung the remote control at the wall and storming his feet, left the room. Taiba, helpless and humiliated, watched him go. It was New Year's Eve, 30 minutes to go before the new year began. A group of teen or so teenagers were roaring around the city streets on their motorbikes, doing all kind of stunts. Some of them wore shiny headbands to celebrate the coming year. An hour ago, they were in one of the uptown supermarkets, teasing girls with pistols. They had firecrackers too, which they let off to celebrate. At a quarter to 12, they reached they reached the parking lot of the Gymkhana Club where a New Year's party was in full swing. The boys had also had invitations to the party and their parents were already there when they got in. It was 5 to midnight. In a few moments the lights in the hall and the dance floor would be switched off and then a display of fireworks on the lawns. The new year should be heralded in the partying would be all night dancing, drinking, all the festive, specially organized for the occasion by the Gymkhana managements. Lights off meant a display of complete abandon. That was what the crowds came for. One of the teenagers who had joined the party was on the dance floor, rocking to the beat and impressing all with his performance. At 10 seconds to 12, the lights were on off. Voices and laughter filled the hall as people counted the seconds to the new year, and this rose to a pitch as the clock struck midnight and the hall lit up again. The teenagers were now out in the way parking lot. The cars were horns blaring away, beer can in the hands. The youth who was on the dance floor got on the roof of a car. He pulled out another beer can from his jacket and pitched it at the windscreen of a parked car, which shattered with an explosion as the full can hit it. He stood on the car, calmly drinking from the can of beer in his hand. For the last half hour, Salar had been watching Kamran trying to master the video game. The score remained the same, probably because Kamran was trying to maneuver a different track. Salar was also in the lounge, busy writing notes. From time to time, he would look at the TV screen as Kamran struggled to win more points. Half an hour later, Salar put his notebook away, stiffed a yawn, stretched his legs out of the table, and crossing his hands behind his head, looked at the TV screen as Kamran started a new game, having lost the previous round. What's the problem, Kamran? Nothing. I got this new game, but it is really tough to score. Kamran said in a tired tone. Let me see. Sarar got up from the sofa and took the remote control. Kamran watched silently. In the opening second, Salar was racing at a speed that Kamran had never reached. The track that had challenged Kamran was like child's play for Salar. It was hard for Kamran to keep his eyes on the car that was racing at a fantastic speed in the first minute, and yet Salar had completed control over it. 3 minutes later, Kamran saw the car Sriu go off the track and explode into smithereens. Kamran turned to Salar with a smile. He realized why the car had been destroyed. Laying the remote control down on the table, Salar picked up his notebook. It's a very boring game, he remarked as he jumped over Kamran's leg and went out. Kamran clenched his teeth as he saw the 7 digit score on the screen. He looked at the door as Salar left. They both were quiet once again. Asjad was beginning to worry. Imama had not always been as withdrawn as she was now. One could have counted the words she had spoken in the last half hour. He had known her since childhood. She was a lively girl. In the first year after their engagement, Asjad had felt happy in her company. She was so quick, righted, and vivacious. But in the last few years, she had changed. The transformation having become more pronounced since she started medical school. Asjad felt that she had something on her mind. At times, she would appear to be worried, and sometimes she was distinctly cold and distant as though she wanted to end their meeting and leave as soon as possible. This time, too, he had the same feeling. I often think that it is I who insist on our meeting. Perhaps it makes little difference to you whether we meet or not, he said despondently. She was sitting on a garden chair across for him, looking at the creepers on the boundary wall. At Asjad's remark, she fixed her gaze on him. He cast an inquiring glance, but she was silent, so he rephrased his words. My coming here makes no difference to you, Imama, am I right? What can I say? At least you can say, no, you're mistaken that. No, you're mistaken. Imama cut him short. Her tone was as cold as her expression, as indifferent as before. Asjad sighed in despair. Yes, I wish and pray that it may be so that I may indeed be mistaken. However, talking to you, I feel you don't care. What makes you think so? Asjad detected a note of annoyance in her tone. Many things. For one, you never respond properly to anything I say. I do make every effort to reply properly to whatever you say. What can I do if you do not like what I have to say? Asjad felt that she was more annoyed. I did not mean that I don't like what you say. It's that you only say yes or no in response. Sometimes I feel as I am talking to myself. When you ask me if I am well, I will say yes or no. What else can I say? If you want to hear a smile in response to a simple question, tell me what you would like to hear and I'll say it. She was serious. You could add something to that, yes or no. If nothing else, ask me how I am. Ask you how you are. You are sitting here across me talking to me. Obviously, you're quite well. Otherwise, you'd be at home in bed sick. Imama, these are formalities, and you know very well that I don't believe in formalities. There is no need for you to ask me how I am. I will not mind it at all. Asjad was speechless. Fine, formalities aside, one can talk of other things, discuss something, talk to each other about what interests us, what keeps us busy. Asjad, what can I discuss with you? You are a businessman, I am a medical student. What should I ask you about the stock? Market position? Was the trend bullish or bearish? How many points did the index rise or where you are sending the next consignment? How much debate did the government give you this time? She went on coldly. Or shall I discuss anatomy with you? What affects the function of the liver? What new techniques have been used for bypass surgery this year? What should be the voltage of electric shocks given to restore a falling heart? These are our spears of work. These are the phases of work. So, what points of discussion can we have about familiarity? I failed to understand. The color of Asjad's face depended. He was cursing the moment that he had complained to Imama. There are other interests too in a person's life, he said weakly. No, besides my studies, there's no other interest in my life, Imama said decisively, shaking her head for emphasis. After all, we shared interest earlier on. Forget about what happened earlier, Imama interjected. I cannot afford to waste time now. What surprises me is that despite being a businessman, you are so immature and emotional. You should be more practical. So here our episode ends. It's a very interesting story. And Nimra has made a suspense in the first scene that what was the wish of her friend. So inshallah, I'll come in the next episode. If you guys showed some response in this episode, I'm making short videos because I want to see are you guys interested in watching this. Inshallah, next video. Allah Hafiz.